Just continuing on, this is the second session of the four-part series of the Introduction to Buddhist Meditation. To recap on some of the things which I was talking about and explaining last week, this meditation is a way of calming the mind inside by focusing it on the breath, by allowing the attention, instead of going out into the that part of our mind which deals with business and plans and memories, but to be able to allow the mind to focus down on the present moment, to be able to stay in that which we call the here and the now. I gave a simile last week of the two suitcases which many people carry around with them throughout their lives, throughout their day, never putting it down for a moment. And those suitcases packed with the business of our future and our past. And if you consider it and experience it, you will notice that all of that which we call stress, much of that which occupies our mind and causes it tiredness, is very much concerned with this future and the past. And the idea of meditation is to get a rest, a respite from this mind which continually worries about the future and dwells upon the past. And the meditation, when it sees the goal, sees when it needs to be done, through some practice, through some training, through doing it, eventually the attention of the mind settles down in an inner spot, a spot which is inside of you, instead of going out into the world, a spot which is inside the moment instead of going out into the future and the past. And when one gets into that, what we call the one-pointedness, getting centered, getting inside of the here and now, then one starts to appreciate the peacefulness of meditation, the quietness of the mind, which is resting, which is not going out and about. So this was the goal of the meditation. The way to achieve this goal was, first of all, sitting down quietly on the floor or on a chair. I mentioned last week the posture isn't so important. It's just so that we can sit in such a way that we can leave the body alone for the period of the meditation. So we're not overly worried and concerned about feelings in the body. So we can concentrate all of our attention on the mind. And sitting down quietly, then we bring our attention into the present moment. We notice that the mind, by its nature, goes outwards to the past and the future. We've been doing this for so many years, and it's why sometimes it appears to be difficult, because we're going against an ingrained habit. So we bring the attention in. And as we bring the attention in, to help with this, we just observe the feeling of the breath as it goes in and goes out. Remember, that which you observe in this meditation on the breath is just a feeling of breathing. That which tells you whether the breath is going in or which tells you the breath is going out. Wherever that feeling is, however it appears, is not important, as long as you know where the breath is. And the other important thing, which I was discussing last week, is that the tendency is that whatever we watch, we want to control, we interfere with. And with the meditation on the breath, the most important thing is to be able to watch the breath as they say, as a silent observer, just to watch without interfering, to be able to observe the breath going in as it is, without trying to change it, without making it any different than it is. So we just watch the breath passively. This is important because if we try and control the breath, you will find the breath becomes uncomfortable. No matter how uncomfortable it might start with, if you try and control it, it gets even worse. So we try and just watch the breath as a disinterested observer. If the breath is uncomfortable, it tends to quieten down in this way. As it quietens down, it becomes easier to watch. And we're aiming at this particular part of the meditation just to gain a state where we can just watch each in-breath and each out-breath, each in-breath and each out-breath, without too many distractions, where the mind spirals in onto the breathing until that's all it sees, just breath going in, breath going out. Now, before I go any deeper into the explanation of the meditation, I will start talking in this session about some of the problems which might arise in the meditation. Because before we get any deeper, you will notice that you will encounter some difficulties. And last week I did encourage you to try and do some meditation during the week. And one of the first things a person usually finds when they embark on this meditation is that it's not as easy as it sounds. Sorry. I encouraged last week, or I described last week, that it's very easy just to watch one in-breath and out-breath. But when it gets to a whole series of in-breath and out-breath over many, many minutes, you find yourself thinking about so many different things. The mind just wanders off. And then you catch yourself thinking about something completely different, not knowing where the breath is. Now, I'm sure that many of you have experienced the wandering mind. And that's one of the first things we find out in meditation, how much the mind is out of control, how it can't keep quiet. To illustrate this, I like to tell a story at this particular juncture. It's a story of a young man who went to join a monastery. It was a very strict monastery where you weren't allowed to speak at all. Except for once every 7 years, you're allowed to say one sentence to the abbot. The idea was that once every 7 years, you're supposed to give some indication to the senior monk how far you'd advanced in your practice of meditation. This young man was a very diligent young monk. He did everything which was expected of him, and he appeared, at least on the outside, to be doing very well. And when it came to 6 years, 11 months and 30 days of his monastic life, and the next day was a big day, he stayed up all night, practicing something profound that he would say to his superior the following morning. It may have been because of his staying up all night, or it may have been just because of excitement. When he actually went into the abbot's room, he forgot everything which he planned, and what he said was, "The food here is terrible." Unfortunately, he was only allowed one sentence, so that was it. He had to wait another 7 years before he could say something again. And he'd been in this monastery 13 years, 11 months and 30 days. And of course he was much wiser than the last time. He had a good night's sleep. And he had something very profound he'd like to say to the abbot. But again, when he walked into that room, something took hold of him, and instead of saying something profound, he said, "The beds are too hard here." The abbot said, "Okay, very well, see you again in another 7 years." After 21 years as a monk, he went into the abbot's room for the third time to say the third sentence he'd spoken in 21 years. This time, he was not nervous at all. This time, he said exactly what he meant to say. He said, "I can't stand this place anymore, I'm leaving." And the abbot said, "It's a very good job, you've done nothing but complain ever since you came here." Now, I told that story because it has a very good meaning to it. On the surface it's funny, but the abbot was absolutely correct. Because one doesn't just complain with words. All the time that monk was in that monastery, he was thinking, "The beds are too hard. He was saying to himself, the food here is terrible. And that's why when it actually came out to speak, came time to speak, that's what came out. And so sometimes when we talk about silence, it's not so much the silence of not speaking, but the silence of not thinking. We think too much inside, and sometimes, even though we might not say it, we've been complaining all day. Now this is one of the biggest problems in the meditation, to quieten this inner speech, this inner complaining. And that's why the monk couldn't stay in that monastery. That's why the beds were too hard, because that inner thought wasn't stopped. This is one of the biggest problems in meditation, to stop that inner commentary. Now last week I did give you an indication of what this problem is by giving that simile of watching the television. I gave the simile of watching, say a tennis match, where there are two contests going on there. What you see on the screen and what you hear from the loudspeaker. They're two separate things. If you can notice the difference in your mind between what you experience of the world and what you think you experience, then you've got an idea of the difference between the reality and the interpretation. Now a lot of us spend too much time and give all the emphasis to the interpretation of the world, to like the commentary which is coming out of the loudspeaker, and not spending enough time with the reality of the experience. And that is why that the thinking part of the mind sometimes takes over, and we give all the attention to the thinking mind, which can very easily turn into complaining, seeing faults in things. Now with the meditation, if we're going to be successful, we have to also notice the experiencing mind. Now that experiencing mind always occurs, but usually with many people it occurs and then immediately after the experience comes the commentary. And that commentary usually takes up more space in the mind than the experience itself. So much so that we take the commentary for reality and we miss the experience. First of all, I ask you to know the difference between experience and commentary. I can give you a few little exercises for this. Where are your fingers now? Don't look at them, feel them. What does that feel like, the feeling in your fingers? It's hard to explain that with a commentary, because much which is feeling defies words. You cannot say it's good or bad, it's painful or it's joyful. It's somewhere in between these things. Now I just ask you to notice that feeling without saying anything at all, in your mind. The feeling in your fingers, wherever they are now. That's experience. Once you understand about experience, you can go outside and you can feel the wind in your face without thinking about it. You can go and watch the stars at night without figuring out their names or their positions. You can watch nature without losing its meaning by thinking too much about it. And this is where the mind starts to become quiet, when you spend more time experiencing the world and less time thinking about it. This is especially important with the meditation we're going to be doing, especially with the meditation on the breath. If you spend all the time thinking about the breath, you're not watching it, you're not experiencing it, and the mind will never get quiet. I'll give you another simile which might make the point quite clear. Meditation is a way of resting the mind. Another way of resting will be to go in your home, sit out in the garden, and just rest, and take it easy, take 5. Many people have gardens in their home, but very few people know how to rest in their gardens. For many people, a garden is a place of work, to do things. So we say, when you next go into your garden, don't go and go there to water the garden or to prune the flowers or to fertilize the flower beds or to prune the bushes. Just go there and rest. Don't take a book out there. Don't take a newspaper. Just go and rest. Enjoy your garden. So a person takes this advice and they take out a chair on a nice afternoon, they sit in their garden, and what do? They think about mowing the lawn. They start to worry about the gardens and the garden needs pruning, something needs fertilizing. Now this is again getting lost in the commentary. The only way that you can enjoy a garden, because you'll notice that something always needs to be done in the garden. It's never perfect. The only way that you can rest is to be able to say, even though the lawn needs mowing, even though the flower beds need fertilizing, even though something needs pruning, something needs watering, not now. Now is the time to appreciate all of the labours you've given to that garden. Now's the time just to enjoy the garden without working, without planning, without criticizing, just to take that garden as it is. I say this because so often what we experience in our inner garden, in our mind, is not perfect. There's always something missing, there's always something to be done. If you try and change that first of all, before you really rest, you'll find you'll never get any peace at all. You'll always be working. So when we are watching, say, the breath in our meditation, even though it's not perfect, even though the body may be aching, even though the mind may not be as still as you want it to be, even though there's many things which need to be done, not now. Now is the time to rest. Now is the time to experience this mind as it is. Once you have this attitude of just experiencing and not criticizing, being rather than thinking, you have a great clue into how to meditate. Traditionally, we start to talk about things like hindrances to meditation. And one of the first two hindrances are called like desire and aversion. Desire and aversion is just sitting in this garden, and desire is saying, I want to do this, I want to do that. Aversion is saying, this is not good enough. It's all about a lack of contentment with what you're experiencing. And this lack of contentment with what you're experiencing is that which fuels the mind to go off. It cranks the mind into activity to change what you're experiencing. It's all born of this thinking mind rather than the experiencing mind. If you wish to gain this peace in meditation, notice that these hindrances, the desire and aversion, take you away from peacefulness and contentment. And the only way that you can overcome these things is to say, even though it's not perfect, it's good enough. Even though there's something to be done, not now. This is time to rest. This is time just to experience rather than to change, rather than to do. This is not the time for business. It's the time for rest. And it's very important to notice that these two hindrances of desire and aversion take you away. Desire is like something out there which pulls you towards it, pulls you away from here and now. For example, imagine just a really nice meal. Maybe you're going out this evening. Can you picture that really nice meal in front of you now with all the trimmings? As soon as you start to think of a meal, something delightful, it just pulls you away from here and now, and you're not experiencing what you're with now. Like desire is what pulls you away from the present moment, and aversion is what pushes you away from now. Both these two things are pulling and pushing you away from here, away from now, away from stillness. It's not to say that you should give up all desire and aversion. It's to say that during the meditation period, give these things up. It's not the time for doing these things during meditation. During meditation, you can say to yourself, no desire, no aversion. are just going to be with what is, rather than always try to change it. Trying to change things leads to restlessness, leads to busyness, and there becomes no peace in the mind. So we develop, instead of desire or aversion, this place in between which is called contentment. Contentment with what we're experiencing right now. If you can develop this contentment with what you're experiencing right now, you'll find the words disappear and you are actually experiencing the present moment, rather than thinking about it. I'll give another little simile now, which shows that much of this thing we call desire and aversion is actually not seeing things fully. The little story I like to give is the story of my brick wall at our monastery in Serpentine. Because when we first moved to our monastery in the town of Serpentine, about 60 kilometers from here, we were very poor. We had a great debt for just a block of land, and so the monks had to just sleep under the trees with the kangaroos. We had no places to stay. We had to learn how to build, because we couldn't afford builders. So I had to learn how to mix concrete, how to lay bricks, how to put on a roof, how to do plumbing, the whole works. Laying bricks was not easy. You'd lay a few bricks and you stand back and inspect them, and they'd be all over the place. You'd have to take them out and start over again, scrape off the mortar and begin once more. But after a while you got the hang of it. Then you'd lay quite a lot of bricks. Then you'd stand back. But this time the mortar was dry, and when you saw the two bad bricks, you realized that you couldn't take them out anymore. They were stuck there. And I was very embarrassed when I saw the two bad bricks in my wall. We had a few visitors coming, I'd take them somewhere else. Not only because we're embarrassing them, because we were hoping they might make a donation if they saw my bad wall. But after a while, somebody came and saw that wall with its two bad bricks, and they said, "What a beautiful wall that was." I said, "Come off it, are you blind?" They said, "No." "Can't you see those two bad bricks?" They said, "Yes, but we can also see the 998 other good bricks." And for me, every time I went past that brick wall, all I ever saw was two bad bricks. My eyes went to those bricks straight away, and I never saw any other brick in that wall. And that was a very good teaching for me, to understand that very often that which I feel aversion towards, that which I'm not content with, is not actually seeing the full story. All I go to is the faults, the two bad bricks. When someone points out all the other bricks in that wall, it's not such a bad wall after all. And that wall there is still in the monastery. And I haven't blown it up or taken it down with a bulldozer. It's quite a nice wall. I've come to be content with it. Contentment is understanding that in every wall, in every person, in every moment, there'll be a couple of bad bricks. There's also some very, very good bricks as well. When you see them all, you can live with it at peace. So whatever you're experiencing now, be careful that you don't get lost in this fault-finding mind, which only sees the two bad bricks. If you look deeper, you'll find in this moment there are other bricks there as well. And you can be at peace with the moment. You don't need to have this desire and aversion which keeps you busy all the time, changing things, trying to be a perfectionist. Just let go of being a perfectionist. Let go of breathing the perfect breath, just experiencing this breath now as it is without trying to change it. This is the way of getting rid of the first of what we call the two hindrances of desire and aversion. Learning contentment. The third and the fourth hindrances are called too much energy and too little energy. With one's meditation, it's not something one just sits back and just allows the mind to go in its normal way. If you do so, you'll often fall asleep. I once taught some meditation in the jail at Canning Vale, which was a high security jail, and so we needed one of the warders, one of the guards in constant attendance. When I was teaching the meditation, The water fell asleep. Which was a difficult situation for me there. I could have got in big trouble. But it shows you that sometimes that you have to be careful, because when you let go of this desire and aversion, sometimes you can go too deeply into peacefulness and fall asleep. I tell people who have this problem, who fall asleep when they meditate, say it's half good, but not completely right. You're getting peaceful, but you're not there to enjoy it when it happens. So be peaceful, but also be awake. To become awake when you're peaceful just means that extra bit of energy, that extra bit of alertness, that extra bit of what we call mindfulness, to be fully aware, rather than to take these moments for granted. It just needs like straightening the back a bit, looking a bit clearer, looking a bit deeper. Sometimes people think the meditation can be boring. What are you doing? Just watching the breath one after the other. At first it can be boring as, have you ever learned how to play a piano or learn a guitar? When you're first learning these things, it's just so boring. All you have to do is go up and down on these terrible scales. You can't really play anything interesting. You have to go through this until you get this ability to really play beautifully, to be a maestro of your instrument. The instrument you're playing now is your mind. You can either make terrible noises with this mind, and it comes out both from the mouth and from your body, or you can learn how to be a maestro with this mind. It takes a lot of training at first, and sometimes it can appear boring at first, but just carry on with it. And when you gain peace of mind, when you gain the great joys and blisses inside meditation, you realize this isn't boring stuff at all. This is one of the most interesting exercises that you can do. They're one of the most joyful experiences you can have in deep meditation. That boring is just not putting enough energy into what you're doing, not noticing the great beauty of meditation. And I'll deal with this later on in a future talk about some of the insights which can arise in meditation, some of the great wisdom experiences which come up, which shows enormous beauty where you'd never expect it. So just put a little bit of interest in the meditation. One of the ways of developing a bit of interest is to look for what I call the beautiful breath. As you're meditating, if you follow the meditation procedure properly and you're successful in watching the breath one after the other, you'll notice the breath starting to quieten down. As it quietens down, it gets very soft. As it gets soft, it gets to be the beautiful breath, a breath which is so subtle and light and attractive that you can watch it without any effort, in great happiness and contentment and joy. And that beautiful breath, once it arises, is very easy to follow, because you don't want to go anywhere else. You don't want to think about anything else. You don't want anything else in the world. You're completely content with a beautiful breath. Just one breath going in and one breath going out. You're fully content. That is great peace, and that is great happiness. So, a little bit more effort, a little bit of more mindfulness, turning up the lights in the mind, and this beautiful breath will appear to you. The next of these hindrances is like too much energy. And for many people, we usually err on the side of too much energy. We can't stop thinking. In fact, we're sort of compulsive thinkers, and it's very difficult for us to stop this thinking mind. I've given one way of stopping this thinking mind, is just by going to the experience and not the thoughts. Another way which I can give you to stop the thinking mind is to notice the space between thoughts. Think a thought and watch what happens when that thought ends. There's a gap between thoughts, just as there are gaps between words. But a lot of the time we don't notice the gaps. We just notice the things. In the same way, we come in this room here, and what do we notice in this room? We notice the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and the people and the objects in this room. We don't notice the space between these objects, that which surrounds these people, that which is enclosed by the room. That which is enclosed by the room, the space, the gap between the people here, is very hard for us to talk about. It's space, it's emptiness. But that exists in this room as well. If you pay attention to the gaps between thoughts, the gaps between these objects which populate our mind, it's the same as noticing the space between the objects in this room. We go to silence very quickly. We don't go to a restless mind, we go to a peaceful mind. The more things there are in your mind, the more things there are to think about. When there's nothing in the mind, what you've got to think about. So this other way of stopping this thinking mind, this restless mind, is to notice the gaps between the thoughts. Once you start to notice the gaps, the spaces between the thoughts, strange things happen. The gap between the thoughts starts to get longer and longer. What you notice grows. If you notice thoughts, thoughts grow. If you notice space, space grows. As you notice the gaps between these thoughts, you'll experience greater degrees of quietness in the mind. That's one way of overcoming this restlessness in the mind. Another way of overcoming this restlessness is again to pay more attention to the present moment. Because much of this restlessness goes into the future and the past. Now, one way of gaining a bit more competence to stay in the present moment is to understand this simile of a Chinese proverb of the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step and finishes with one step, and all along the journey, all there ever was one step. The step you're walking now. It's a lovely simile because if you think of a 1,000-mile journey, you will never even start it. It's too far for you to walk. It's much better to get a buzz. But the 1,000-mile journey can be accomplished very easily if you just concern yourself with one step, the step you're walking now. You begin with one step. All along the journey, all you're concerned with is the step you're walking now. And one day, that step you're walking now becomes the last step, and the journey is finished. And to you, the whole journey has just been one step long. With the breath, a meditation may be 1,000 breaths long. The restlessness of the mind will start to think, how many minutes are left? How many minutes have gone? We start to think of other things except this one step which you're walking now, this breath which you're breathing now. If you know the secret of the journey of 1,000 miles and how to complete it, by just putting your mind on the step you're walking now, you'll find that much of the restlessness in the mind disappears. All you need to do in this meditation is just watch one breath. Last week I showed you could do that very easily. If you know the journey of 1,000 miles and how to walk it, the whole meditation is just one breath long. And it becomes easy to watch. In fact, it's just an attitude of mind which enables one to stop being so restless. Put all your attention on what you're doing now instead of what you're doing next, or what you've done, or what someone else is doing. What you're doing now stops restlessness. The last hindrance which comes up in the meditation is doubt. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Is this what we're supposed to be doing? What's the purpose of all this? Again, if you're doing the journey of 1,000 miles, stop all of that. You know how to walk. You know how to breathe. All you need to do is just to watch. If you're aware of the breath as it's happening now, you're doing it right. You don't need to doubt at all whether this meditation is going to work or not. However, much of this doubt is born of impatience. We want results straight away, now. We want to become enlightened this evening because we've got lots of other things to do later on this weekend. So be patient with this meditation. It works. Just give it time. And put all the attention on what you're doing now. So these are like 5 of the obstacles which can come up, which stop you achieving success in meditation. And these are the ways to overcome it. Again, just to sum up before we do some meditation this afternoon, the first of these obstacles, or the first 2 are desire and aversion. It shows a lack of contentment in the mind. And that lack of contentment can often come up in this complaining mind. Realize that no matter what it is, it's always like a brick wall with 2 bad bricks and 998 good bricks. Leave it alone. Even though the garden is something wrong with it, you don't need to mess around with it now. Leave it alone and just experience this moment rather than trying to think about it. The tiredness, the sleepiness in the mind, again, one just needs to look a bit more clearly at what you're experiencing. It's a good state, it's a peaceful state, but be there to enjoy it. And you'll find that peacefulness, when you're very mindful and aware of it, is a beautiful state to abide in. Restlessness, maybe spend a bit more time just watching the space between these thoughts. Or maybe just remember that journey of 1,000 miles, just one step at a time. Put all your attention on just watching one breath. That's all you need to do. One breath at a time. And then the whole journey of meditation completes itself very peacefully and successfully. In doubt, you know how to meditate. All you need to do is watch a breath, to experience it. However it appears to you is fine. Leave it alone and the things will happen by itself. So this is the way of meditation. This is some of the problems you'll encounter. If there's, I didn't miss out one important point, if there's any problem with the body, any aches and pains, if you're meditating a long time, it's called restlessness of the body. The way to deal with restlessness of the body is to ignore it. The body is always, it's like a child, always wanting your attention. Even when it's comfortable, it'll always be itchy, it'll always want to be moved here, moved there. I compare that restlessness of the body to like a body with lots of people living in it, always phoning you up. So if you sit down, like in the ear rings you and says, "I'm itchy, please scratch me." Or it's the knee, which is aching, please move me. You know what it's like if you answer the phone, you get into this long conversation and you waste a lot of time. The way to get out of this problem is never answer the phone. It might keep ringing for a while, but then people think you're not in and they stop. If you don't answer the phone from these different parts of your body, then after a while the body will stop ringing and you'll be at peace. This is actually what happens if you don't pay attention to these small aches and pains, these small telephone calls from different parts of your body. They disappear. They stop calling you. And this is when the body disappears. When the body disappears, it hasn't gone away, it's just, it takes its phone off the hook as well. It stops calling you. And you don't feel any aches and pains in the body, no itches, no heat, no cold. And you put all your attention on the breath. So if the body starts to ring you up, don't pick up the receiver. If you do, then someone else will ring you up for sure. If it's not the ear, it's the under the elbows somewhere, or the back, or the bottom is sore. There's always something comes. So be careful of restlessness of the body and overcome it by not answering the phone. So, before we actually begin with the meditation today for 10 minutes, are there any questions you'd like to ask about some of the difficulties of meditation? Maybe after the meditation, when you've experienced some of those difficulties, you might ask for a question. So if you'd like just to get yourself comfortable, if you have been sitting down and you're a bit sore, then get up and just stretch your legs or something, and then in, say, half a minute, you can actually sit down.